Welcome to the meeting of the Forensics Committee of the Scottish Police Authority. The first session is held in public, and so as a very warm welcome to anyone who is joining us to observe today's business. I have no apologies to note. A particular welcome to those who are joining us for various agenda items, either as observers or to contribute their documents. Before we start in the business of the day, can we go through, are there any declarations of interest? None have been intimated. Thank you. And in item 1.3, they have for approval the draft minute for the meeting of the Forensics Committee of the 25th of October 2021 is approved by members. See notes there, thank you. We then move on to the action log and matters arising from that. You'll see that there are the first three actions in the rolling action log and the public actions are proposal for closure. You have had this documentation and had the opportunity to scrutinise it. Are members content to close those items? Okay, thank you. We'll note them as closed. We then carry on down in the next action around digital forensics, which we know is a very extensive and complex area. It's proposed as ongoing, and it will be subject to further discussion as we go through today's business. We then move on to the actions around workforce planning, and there's further development of this ongoing. Draft is in development. The final version is intended to be brought into the April Forensics Services Committee meeting, so that is proposed as ongoing as well. In relation to the action and performance reporting, I know that work around KPIs is ongoing and consideration for inclusion within the memorandum of understanding with the key partners, and this is going to be discussed. So that is still ongoing as well. And I know there's been conversations going on off table in relation to that. The next action again is the one relating to demonstrating value. I know that Member Jane Ryder has been speaking to the Director Fiona Douglas regarding that and staff, and that is ongoing also. These are all areas that I've discussed during the meeting. So that's the action log. Members content to agree with the proposals around those actions. Thank you. The next item 1.5, is in relation to a standing orders decision on taking business in private. Just to reiterate, the absolute intention of the committee is that where possible, business is conducted in public. In accordance with section 20 of the standing orders, you're asked to agree to take items 10 to 18 in private. Are members content to do that? Okay, that's agreed. Then move on to the first substantial item for the committee today, which is item 2, the Forensic Services Director's Report. So Fiona Douglas, can I ask you to present your report? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll take the report as read and highlight a number of areas that are particularly pertinent to Q3 in relation to the provision of forensic services. So it's been a very busy period, as always, and further complicated by the COVID pandemic over this period as a result of the Omicron variant, which did increase the levels of staff abstractions over this period. However, despite that and the other challenges of the festive time of the year, the work that was delivered through the organisation has been completed within the required timescales. A significant milestone within the forensic change programme related to the initiation of full staff consultation in November of 2021 with all staff and forensic services in relation to the introduction of a proposed new operating model for forensic services, along with associated projects around how we deploy scene examination staff, and also how our services are accessed by our colleagues in Police Scotland, COPFS and PERC. That's a lengthy consultation period that has now started and will run for around about 6 months. And we are in a period now of discussing those proposals with our staff, and also looking at ideas that they may have to further improve that, to get the best possible model for forensic services moving forward. We continue to work hard with colleagues across Police Scotland to develop the project around the transition of post-mortem toxicology services from Glasgow University to forensic services, and that's due to go live in around about December of this year. So some really strong partnership working both with Glasgow University but also with colleagues across Police Scotland in terms of supporting the transfer of those services. In addition, through this period, we have been working closely with colleagues in Police Scotland to prioritise cases involving potential drug spiking, as well as providing ongoing advice and guidance on sample collection and analysis. These cases are dealt with when they're received into forensic services. The analysis that's required is complex, and they are started as soon as they're received. And depending on the complexity of those cases, that analysis is taking up to 4 months to complete at this particular point in time. The scientific results are carefully considered before these are provided back to colleagues in Police Scotland to support the investigations into these instances. The challenges around toxicology provision as a whole, so that more broadly aligns with the introduction of the drugs driving section 5A legislation, continue to work with colleagues across Police Scotland, COPFS and more broadly in Scottish Government to look at developing a sustainable model for the provision of those cases in the coming months. From a staff perspective, we have been looking at the feedback that our staff provided in the Your Voice Matters survey, and a number of discussions have been held in developing an initial action plan in relation to those results, and we'll be engaging with staff across the organisation to talk to them about their feedback in the coming weeks. So that's a summary of some of the broad areas within the paper, but I'm happy to take any questions.
So the paper has been circulated beforehand. Can I ask members to have any questions at this stage for Fiona? Fiona, Paul Edie, thank you.
Yes, can I ask the remote evidence for High Court proceedings? Obviously, that's quite a departure due to COVID from the way it was done before. Are there any plans to continue this? Have there been any discussion with the Crown Office, for example, that this might be something that will continue? Because obviously pulling experts in takes them away from other duties and they're often queuing up waiting to get into court.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Paul. I think this absolutely is something that could continue, and those discussions are ongoing with the courts to make sure that the evidence is provided in a way that is useful. You know, with the current restrictions, particularly taking that into consideration, it absolutely is a more efficient method for the provision of evidence from a scientist perspective, in that it reduces time travelling around the country to attend courts. So I would hope that we can retain at least some elements of remote evidence provision in the future.
Before I come to you, Caroline, I see that Kenny Doyley from the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service has put his hand up, so I'm taking this in relation to this. It would be helpful to hear if you can add to that response, Ken.
I thought it was a very subtle attempt for Paul to fish me out, so I thought I'd better jump in. Yeah, so this is something that we have been working on, Paul, for a while. There are a number of provisions which allow for witnesses to give their evidence remotely pre-COVID, you know, so it's not absolutely new, but it's not something that was routinely done. So we do it in circumstances where a witness, for example, is overseas and can't travel, you know, or such likes, and in other sort of limited circumstances. But it's something that we've been keen to explore with the court before COVID, and COVID's provided an opportunity perhaps to nudge up the agenda. It's something which is in place. There's a working group looking at it. It's implemented for High Court at the moment, but with a view to looking to see whether it can be expanded to the Sheriff Court as well. And we'll certainly be working with the court service and others to try and encourage that we continue to make best use of that where it's appropriate. We need to make sure that the technology is right. So we've had one or two instances where, for example, there was an episode last week where the scientists weren't able to give their evidence remotely because I think of some IT issue at Garcosh, and so they had to taxi their way into the court and delays, and that's unfortunate because obviously those who have had to persuade that this is a good way forward, when you start running into technology issues, it can be a bit of a disincentive for them. But we'll continue to work on and to hopefully evidence that it's an effective means for securing the evidence of the witnesses, as well as making best use of witnesses' times. It's not just for forensic scientists, not just for police officers. Some of the expert witnesses that are travelling, you know, from different parts of the UK and elsewhere in the world, it gives us a better opportunity, I think, to secure their cooperation in the criminal justice process if they know they're not going to have to give up days of their time for a relatively short piece of evidence.
Thanks very much for that. It's fair to say that we've been able to see through from performance reporting to this committee that flexibility and use of technology and providing the expert advice has allowed forensics to meet demand despite reduced capacity during the COVID restrictions and self-isolations, etc. So the benefits are pretty stark to this committee. So thank you for that. Caroline, thanks for your patience.
No, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Fiona, for your report. Very interesting as always, and thanks for your explanation on the spiking incidents and the responses. And this is a subject that's come up a couple of times at the board recently, just because of the huge increase that we're seeing, which is absolutely awful. And I just wondered then, because we're seeing this increase, do you feel that you've got enough kind of capacity within the system to be able to deal with these? Because it is an increase. I know it's a bit like the drug driving. Once you start, your demand goes through the roof. So it's a bit like that. But I'm just wondering, in terms of, because we are seeing this increase, just in terms of your own capacity. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. So a couple of points I would make there is that we're working very closely with colleagues in Police Scotland to make sure that we are prioritising these cases for analysis. So there is capacity within the system to make sure that these cases are progressed within the timescales that are required. As I said in my opening comments, the analysis in these cases can be quite complex, requiring the identification of one or several different types of drugs, and that analysis can take some time. So whilst the more complex cases are taking around about 4 months to complete, many of those are far more straightforward, and as a result are done far more quickly.
Got you. Right, thank you. Thanks, Fiona.
Can I clarify, Fiona, the 4 months period, does that include, is there any backlog within that? Is that longer than you would expect it to be? Or is that just entirely down to the complexity of the analysis?
I think we would always seek to be able to speed up the processes that we have within the system, Chair. However, the nature of the complexity does result in, you know, different types of analysis being undertaken, which in itself does take time. Alongside that, it's not only the results of the analysis, but the complexity of the interpretation within these types of cases that the scientist has to look at and consider the results in the context of each individual case circumstances to make sure that we're providing the results that we require in a meaningful way to Police Scotland to support the subsequent investigation.
But fundamentally, it's not the backlog that's causing that timeline, it's the actual complexity of the analysis.
We are starting these cases as soon as we receive them, so there isn't a backlog of work in this area.
Yeah, okay. I know that we are fortunate to have DCC Graham on today's call. In terms of the operational response to the issue of spiking complaints, etc., and the service getting received from forensics in the laboratory, are there any comments or anything you'd like to make, Mal?
Thanks very much, Tom, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to ask Laura McCluckie to say a little bit about this because she's been leading on a lot of this work. As an organisation, this has been led through our Partnership, Prevention and Community Wellbeing lead, ACC Gary Ritchie, because our primary aim here is to prevent such attacks from happening. But the experience that we have had to date has obviously seen a rise in reports, and it's critical that we investigate all of these cases thoroughly so that we can establish the facts as best as we can in challenging investigations as to what's happened. To my mind, and I've spoken with Fiona about this personally, the joint working and the collaboration in prioritising these cases has been excellent, and in the overall scheme of demands into forensic services from Police Scotland and indeed from wider sources, the level of spiking cases is relatively small, but it is very important, and they are very complex cases, both in terms of investigation and, as I understand it, in terms of the forensic analysis that's required at different stages and levels as well. So I think my short answer is cooperation has been good, and we're satisfied with the level of priority that these cases have been getting. But with your agreement, Chair, if I might ask Laura to say a little bit more about the detail of how we've done that.
Thanks very much, Laura.
Thanks, Sir. Thanks, Chair. Morning, everyone. So actually, myself and Alistair Patience were at the Goal Group chaired by ACC Ritchie this morning in relation to spiking, and Alistair comes along to that meeting and provides a weekly update in terms of the progress of the forensic analysis, and that's been really helpful in terms of understanding for each case what stage everything's at. So I couldn't praise Alistair and the team more highly in terms of the level of service that we've received round about spiking, and I'm sure ACC Ritchie would concur with that. And as we move through the investigations, it's obviously crucial that we understand the full forensic analysis, which Fiona's already highlighted in terms of its complexity, you know, in terms of other alcohol and drugs in people's systems as well, that they obviously they're having to analyse and navigate their way through. And that just further informs our investigation and any future actions that we need to take in terms of trying to identify additional evidence, etc. So, as I said at the start, couldn't be more complimentary of the service that we've received round about spiking from forensic services. Thanks.
Thanks very much. In the broader issues around toxicology, it's clear from, we'll go into it in further detail in the performance, no doubt, but that's the area that it naturally has the biggest demand on it in terms of forensics, and obviously with the issues around drug driving really being a societal issue as well, and it's a new service stepping up to the plate at the moment, and matching demand with capacity is a live issue and ongoing, and it's subject of papers going back between joint papers between Crown and Police Scotland, the Scottish Government, as how we address that going forward. So I know that there is acknowledgement that, you know, we are at the tail end of what's acceptable throughput time scales. You know, I think we're up towards the sort of 10 months probably in an area which under emergency legislation is a year, so we need to be very alert to that going forward. But toxicology in terms of matching capability, capacity to demand is something that we're very alert to. The one other area in the absence of other questions that just now I think which is really important to our workforce, actually, you referenced the staff consultation with the change programme that's ongoing just now, and like this is the early stages of consultation, and you have a range of views coming from that, Fiona, and just reiterate from this committee that we're nowhere near a stage of receiving recommendations from you in terms of the way ahead, but we're very alert to that. It is well, efficiency and effectiveness is right up there, so is public interest in the provision of forensic services in Scotland, and the committee will be taking quite a global view of that going forward. In terms of reassurance of the consultation programme, is there anything further you would add to that just now?
There's a lot of work going on to engage with staff across forensic services through both the formal consultation process, which initially involved the group consultation meetings and has now moved into individual discussions between staff and line managers as part of the formal process, but also less formal engagements to fully understand the proposed operating model, how it's going to deliver the benefits which we're setting out to in terms of how forensic services can add that greater value in terms of public confidence and public impact. But for our staff in particular, it's working with individuals, particularly where there are impacts of that proposed model, to make sure that there's a good level of understanding of the proposals, and also an opportunity to discuss where people think that there could be alternatives that they'd like to be considered through the consultation period. So we've got a high level of engagement with our staff across forensic services and have already received, I think, 17 different ideas from staff which are currently under consideration. So it's a difficult and challenging time for people as change breeds uncertainty. However, we have, I think, a strong level of support through the change team to manage that process and make sure that we are dealing with the questions and queries that our staff have through this period.
Thanks, Joanne. I thought it was important that from the perspective of this committee that we send a strong message that we are very conscious of that consultation and the outcomes from it. And in fact, in terms of the initial business case it's founded upon, it represents a significant investment into forensic services, and we'll watch that carefully, and we are in listening mode at the appropriate times. One other area, I welcome the additional resources come into forensics from the wider SPA Police Scotland capability around change management in terms of programme management and project management, and that gives us a sense of reassurance as well. But the final area, coming off the back of COP26 and all the commitments we've made there, in terms of environmental plans for forensics and net zero, etc., would you be able to give us any sense of where you are with that, and maybe a future report to committee?
Certainly. So we have been engaging with the broader work around the Police Scotland SPA environmental strategy, and we are pulling a picture of the forensic services contribution in terms of both our emissions, but also our contribution in terms of how we can deliver the required improvement to take us towards a net zero position. So we are looking currently at developing that overall plan. We have an established green network and lots of enthusiasm from staff within forensic services in this area. So there's a lot of ongoing work. We'll be developing some environmental objectives and a delivery plan associated with that, which I will bring back to a future Forensic Services Committee meeting. Importantly, we're also considering benchmarking around other forensic science organisations to look at any specific areas for improvement in relation to the type of work that we do and some of the unique environments that we have within policing, particularly in laboratories, and the way that we have to work with plastics and consumables.
Thanks for that. So at the end, there's no further questions for me in relation to the Director's report. Could I just check with members any final points? Okay. Can we move on to item 3 then, your performance report for Q3, Fiona?
Chair, sorry, Caroline Stewart had her hand up. I'm not sure if you could see.
I thought it, Caroline, is that a legacy hand, or have you got a new question?
Apologies, it's a legacy hand. My apologies. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Good. Move on to the performance report, please.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. So I'll just work through a couple of parts of the performance report and highlight a few key areas that I think that the committee may be interested in. So initially moving to page 4 of the report, This shows the overall position within forensic services with regards to laboratory casework in progress within each of the laboratories across Scotland. Broadly speaking, in the chart on the left, it shows the different areas or disciplines within forensic services, the amount of open casework, and then the line signifies the average age of that casework. So you can see we do have a substantial amount of work in progress within the organisation at this time. We are moving in our advancing work on our management information to provide the committee with more of a view on how this trend looks, so that it's easier to draw a link between where circumstances are improving or deteriorating. I think broadly speaking, this is a fairly similar position to what was reported in Q2, with the exception of a few areas which we have seen a slight increase in aging, such as around our mark enhancement part of the organisation, and there's plans in place to actively reduce the size of that work in progress over the coming months. Importantly, you can see in this table as well, we've been talking about toxicology. So the average age of the open cases in toxicology across the board within forensic services is currently sitting at 3.8 months. Moving on to page 5 of the report, this shows the laboratory capacity, again, across each of the different parts of the organisation. And I think it's important to note here that with the exception of toxicology, all of the work that has been ongoing through the delivery of the Forensic 2026 strategy and the investment agreed by the Forensic Services Committee and the authority, we are now starting to see that capacity being far more in balance or over the demand for services in these different areas across the organisation. And I think this is an important milestone to note, that we should now expect to see over Q4 and into the next financial year a reduction in those high caseloads across these different parts of forensic services, and as a result of that, an improvement in the timeliness of the provision of our services. Moving on to page 6, the picture here shows some of the complexity around the casework that's delivered within toxicology. I would highlight a large spike in November in relation to the Section 5A drugs driving cases. That's an administrative anomaly. It is not real increase in demand over that period. And I think it highlights a need for us to have better visibility of those cases that have perhaps just come in or have just recently been approved for submission into the organisation, but have not yet been entered onto the case management system. But broadly speaking, we can see from the charts on page 6 that capacity is still significantly below the overall demand for toxicology services, as previously discussed. On page 7, our scene examination statistics are quoted in terms of our performance across the different areas of Police Scotland. And also broken down in terms of the violent and sexual crime attendance. So we are meeting the overall target in association with violent and sexual crime. However, nationally, we're at 86% against a 90% target to attend scenes within a 24-hour period. We have seen an impact on COVID-related abstractions, which are impacting on the timeliness in this area. However, that is an improving picture, so we would expect to see that return alongside some training of new staff that's ongoing to be able to achieve that 90% target nationally. On page 8 of the report, it highlights the work that's been ongoing with regards to accreditation of forensic services, and in particular during Q3, a substantial amount of work that was undertaken as a result of our reassessment process for our accreditation by the United Kingdom Accreditation Service. So we are reassessed every 4 years. So this was a substantial programme of assessment activity that has been ongoing. The table that is shown here really describes the increasing amount of scrutiny on forensic services as a result of maintaining our accreditation, and actually a very pleasing trend in terms of a reduction in findings, which I think provides good confidence in terms of the quality of the systems, processes and work that's being undertaken across the organisation. On page 9, with regards to complaints and feedback, you can see that in Q3 we had 1 complaint received in relation to services which have been provided, 1 negative feedback and 22 instances of positive feedback, and then some good progress in relation to closing out the investigations into any instances where we receive complaints or negative feedback in relation to the services which we provide. And then finally on page 10, the charts here just describe that impact, particularly of the Omicron variant of COVID in December, and you can see a jump in terms of the absence rates within forensic services. But I'm pleased to be able to report that has now reduced back to the standard levels which we've been seeing through the course of the pandemic, and is not impacting on our ability to deliver service to our partners. That's all of the comments I will make, but I'm happy to take questions.
Question from colleagues. Can we go first to Paul Edith? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It's just the complaints, and the complaints in, are they complaints in and complaints received? Sorry, complaints received and complaints closed. Are they the same thing? It's just a timing thing, or is that complaints that are brought forward from previous quarters?
That would be complaints that are brought forward from previous quarters, right. Paul. So it's the number of complaints received within Q3, which is the initial bar, closed in terms of we've appropriately addressed those within our management system.
Grand, thanks for that.
Fiona, in relation to scene examination unit and the attendance within the time frame, I know that we're hitting the green 90% on sexual and violent offences, but the area that we're not actually is where the volume is, which is around housebreakings and crimes like that. That's a matter of concern. Can you give us some sense of reassurance that in terms of your statement that we're going to return to normal in that?
So that has been impacted by an increased level of absence over that period. There is also training of staff that is being undertaken across those areas that will support the recovery of that performance to the 90% target. But I'll perhaps ask Derek Scrimgeour if he could add any comments in relation to that.
Yes, certainly. Yeah, the training aspect, as Fiona mentioned there, Chair, we've got 5 new level 1s due to join and be trained in the organisation. And level 1s are targeted specifically at crimes of dishonesty, the lower level sort of volume crime. So that will certainly help with that. And we also have some detail within that figure that we're looking at the moment in terms of our timeliness. What that measures is the point between when we're requested to go to a scene and when we attend. But if that request is, for example, for a business not to attend that day, to actually attend the day after because of their businesses, that marks as a fail for us because of that 24 hours. So we need to look at a bit more detail within that figure, but certainly, as Fiona says, the expectation with the new staff and the COVID reducing the impact on our staff, that figure should increase in due course over the next quarter.
Thank you for that, Derek. Jane Ryder, I see you've got your hand up, please.
Thank you. I did have my hand up. It was on that same point actually about the action plan to meet the target. I'm content with that. I've simply got a flag that that's something we will definitely want to identify the improvement at the next meeting, but I'm content with that. Thank you.
Derek, you referenced level 1 senior examiners, and obviously with been on the committee, I am aware, but others may not be, that level 1 and level 2, the differentiation, and maybe touch on how we safeguard our people in terms of the trauma that's involved in scene attendance and things like that. Just give us a sort of an overall view of that.
Sure, yes, sorry, Chair, yeah, using a bit of internal speak there. Yes, so we have level 1s and level 2s. Level 2s are those that are trained further to attend the more serious crimes, who can also attend the lower level crimes, and level 1s specifically are only trained to deal with that lower level crime, so stolen vehicles, housebreakings, that sort of thing. In terms of that wellbeing aspect that you mentioned there, Chair, yes, we have a lot of focus on that at the moment. We have a lot of work in the background going on through wellbeing, one of which is our potential attendance at the Castlebrae facility that Police Scotland currently use to deal with people who are impacted by the trauma of attending scenes. We have various other welfare options, and our managers are focused on it, looking to see whether there are any early indicators of staff experiencing trauma. But the upshot of it is that is the nature of the job. Unfortunately, it is to attend traumatic scenes, and we need to deal with that as best we can, keeping an eye on individual staff welfare.
Thanks for that. Are there any other questions relating to the performance report? I said, Paul Eady, thank you.
Yeah, it was your mention of the volume being housebreaking, and presumably, I mean, I'm interested in trends and so forth. Prior to COVID, I mean, we've got 1,600 cases of housebreaking that you've attended, or crimes of dishonesty. Prior to COVID, people weren't working from home to anything like the same extent, so I would presume that housebreaking has gone down because people have been occupying their homes. Do we anticipate that going up? And if so, will you have enough capacity to keep this performance level up?
That's a very interesting point. Yes, Paul, we did see a decrease in that sort of volume crime, housebreaking type classification of cases. But to be honest, it's come back up again. So we now saw an increase pretty much after the sort of the most major lockdown previously, and that release. So we are looking at the trends of that. The trend in general is certainly down over the past 3 or 4 years in total, and it's pretty proportional, I would say, between serious and the volume crime in terms of that change. But again, that's statistics that we're currently looking and remembering also with the 2026 proposals that we are looking to ring fence a greater proportion of our staff to be able to attend these lower level volume crimes, to be able to bring that statistic back up as well.
Great, thanks for that.
I think if I could just add to Derek's response there, I think it's important to note that the statistics that we're quoting relate to the scenes which we're requested to attend, as opposed to the overall crime statistics. And I think, as Derek said, the strategy that we have for forensic services and the significant investment in transformational change that's ongoing is very much targeted at supporting our response to local policing, and to make sure that we can provide not only a swift scene deployment to instances of housebreaking and other acquisitive crime, but also the subsequent analysis within the laboratory to make sure that we're providing Police Scotland with forensic intelligence as quickly as we can. But also the outcome of the full analysis and any subsequent forensic identifications as a result of that.
Thank you.
Would either DCC Graham or Chief Superintendent McCluckie like to offer a reflection on particularly volume crime as we return to normal and demands on the expectations of forensics?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the performance report, Fiona. I mean, the first thing I would like to say is that generally the level of performance, I think, is very good and improving in terms of the challenges that Forensic Services has had, along with all the rest of us, through the period of the pandemic. Now, there's a couple of issues which are well rehearsed and subject of further consideration later in this meeting. We know that there are challenges with toxicology and on Section 5A. I'm really pleased with the way that we're working together to address that. And specifically in relation to volume crime, I think there's a very clear aspiration to improve that. We know that investment in forensic services is one way by which we can more swiftly bring people to account for those, as you say, high volume, but also really high impact offences on people's lives. And I think we have seen quite a changeable picture during the course of the pandemic, as has been described. So I'm just very keen that we remain in conversation about what future demands might look like and remain as flexible as we can to respond to those with how people are living their lives. A degree of uncertainty around that. Laura might be able to say a little bit more detail about housebreakings, domestic housebreakings, particularly as a priority within those crime types. The final thing I would say is that I think the level of prioritisation, whether it's in terms of the scene attendance or whether it's in relation to making decisions about other cases, is roughly right. That what we're seeing is the cases that are highest impact aligned with our strategic threat and risk assessment, so into areas like serious violence, major investigations, sexual crime, and those that are affecting vulnerable people, you know, is where the performance is highest. Those are the most complex cases, and I think, you know, with more work to do around about the volume crime, but I understand at the moment some of that is driven by capacity and prioritisation. Maybe let Laura say a little bit more about the housebreaking situation and the volume crime more generally, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, sir. So just in terms of Police Scotland have an acquisitive crime lead, and it's one of my detective superintendents that sits out in local policing. Now she chairs a regular meeting, and of course Forensic Services are a key part of that meeting. So that's where we apply some scrutiny in terms of housebreakings, as the DEP highlights. You know, these are really impactful crimes on a person. And we want to maintain that priority for these investigations as well. So we work very closely with Fiona and the team in that regard. And there's kind of other operations that kind of spin off from them. You would have seen recently, Chair, in terms of the impersonation of police officers in the media, and the kind of fraud scams that are, you know, for vulnerable people in our communities. You know, so that again, Forensic Services are a key part of those operations and those groups in terms of how we tackle and respond to any sort of crime type and the kind of acquisitive crime. Yeah.
That's great, thanks. So, can I conclude the Q3 performance report, members? Yeah. Okay, moving on to item 4. Vicky Morton is the update on Forensic Services 2026, and I think we're morphing this sort of standing item into a wider update on the change programme. Obviously, within the change programme, there'll be confidential items and commercial sensitivity, etc., which will be taken in private business. But the overall transformational change that we're seeking in Forensic Services is open to public awareness, and I'm very pleased that you agreed that this item will develop in that way. So, Vicky, can I hand over to you?
Great, thanks very much, Chair, and morning everyone. As you said, yes, we are looking at changing the emphasis of our reporting going forward. So we're looking at a refreshed report for the next meeting, which will hopefully again then really make clear the linkages between our new refreshed Forensic Services strategy, joint strategy for policing, and really show that collaboration with Police Scotland and of course COPFS and other partners. As already touched on by yourself, Chair and Fiona, we're really pleased to confirm that the change function within forensic services has a significantly improved picture since the last committee report. We've now got 16 FTE, 4 from police from forensic services and 12 from Police Scotland, plus really strong links and support from other areas of Police Scotland, including ICT, portfolio assurance, people in development, and of course the functions within forensic services really link in closely together. In terms of, also I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome Heather Kennett, our new programme manager, who's on the call today, and of course welcome the new members of the team. This also gives us, with the investment and the resources of the change programme, really gives us a greater opportunity to further develop the existing links within Police Scotland digital and data strategy, including things like the digital evidence sharing capability or DESK project, where we know we are a key user and contributor to the future system. We really do have a part to play in phase 2 and 3 of that project, and there's ongoing preparatory work and engagement at the moment. In terms of the change programme itself, it's based, as we know, on there's 5 key projects, and I suppose the key element at the moment, as we've already discussed, is in terms of organisational change. So in terms of that, this brings together the operating model, deployment of scene examination and access to lab projects. And as Fiona's already mentioned, we're really in the middle of that consultation, or early stages of the consultation and counter-proposal stages of the process. And that's really in terms of looking for our staff, our people, to help enhance the current proposals as they are set out. As already mentioned as well, communication and engagement has really been centred around keeping our people informed of the progress, engaging with our internal change agent network, Police Scotland, P&D, and of course the trade unions and other diversity staff associations as well. In terms of the table, I'd just like to, that's set out in section 2.6, I'd just like to focus on a couple of points here. Good progress has been noted on the strategic workforce plan, but there have been some delays in terms of that with various movements within the senior management team. And as mentioned in the action log review, we'll look at presenting that to the committee in April. Also aligned there is the MOU development work, which is ongoing, again aiming to go live in April. And just for clarity here, I'd just like to point out that this is looking at that improved demand management piece, and it's not related to the MOU, which you can see in the table in the column to the left, which looks at the operational MOU between Forensic Services and Police Scotland in terms of unified production handling movement. As I've said, and as Fiona's mentioned, the strategy itself, there's a lot of work going on in terms of the launching that strategy, both in terms of externally looking at key stakeholders, looking where we can really add value and share the messages that are in our strategy, but also importantly that is understood by our staff, and they really buy into it and understand what the future looks like for forensic services going forward. Also in relation to the projects, at the last meeting there was a really good suggestion in terms of trying to have visibility of the high level plans and also a RAG status, the status of how we're getting on there. So that's now been included in the appendix to the report as well. So essentially that was the key elements I wanted to bring out, but if there's any questions, more than happy to take those forward. Tom, I think you're on mute.
My sincere apologies. It's a natural progression. We've had the Forensic Strategy 2026 closely aligned with Police Scotland's 2026 strategy, which has now been refreshed with a joint strategy for policing. And your new strategy is about to be launched, obviously, and taking it forward with the change programme attached to that. So it's natural that this agenda item would evolve in this way. Jane.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the report, Vicky. And yes, I'm pleased with how it's evolving. I'm particularly pleased to see the RAG status and that. I think the thing which, again, it's almost a marker. I mean, you've indicated that there is an expectation that we will have that long-awaited MOU, tripartite MOU, which is, let me get this right, a recommendation from an HMICS report. There is also, and not simply related to forensics, the outstanding issue of an MOU or some such under Section 83 between the SPA and Police Scotland. But I'm really pleased to hear about the hugely positive support that Police Scotland are giving to forensics. So the issue is not about the quality of service. The issue, I think, is around the documentation, and particularly because that one comes out of ICO, around the security and the data security aspects. So I think I'm just simply flagging those two and saying, particularly in a forensics context, that tripartite arrangement, I know it's been an ongoing issue, but about demand prioritization, again, good to hear from DCC Graham about their feeling that the prioritization is about right. So again, it sounds as though we're within touching distance, but I'm just putting down a marker. I definitely want to see that at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. We'll note that. Any other questions at this stage for Vicky? Okay, can we move on then to item 5? It's still with you, Vicky, the update on the HMICS thematic inspection recommendations, the progress report you've referenced already.
Great, thanks very much, Chair. Yes, as the paper outlines, there has been good movement here in terms of the closure of recommendations, and I'd just like to highlight that's in particular due to a couple of reasons. One being really beneficial discussions between myself and Police Scotland, but in particular Jamie Picken, who was in the Police Gateway, and also HMICS themselves, really in terms of really understanding the outstanding requirements for closure of a number of recommendations. So I'm pleased to say we've now have 20 which are complete. The recommendations 5, 11, 15 and 16 being closed since the last report. There are 3 outstanding, and as you can see in the appendix, Appendix B, these relate to the MOU, which we've just been discussing, number 4, and as I said, this is anticipated that it'll be in place by April 22, following further engagement with partners. And also in terms of number 12, there's final information hopefully has been passed to HMICS around the failure demand aspect. They just wanted further clarification on a point. And number 18, which looks at the transparent workforce and demand planning model for forensic services. And again, some further information was sent through last month to help hopefully support closure of that one.
Okay, I mean, that's significant progress there. And you look at the overall number of recommendations that were made, there's an awful lot of work going into that and commitment to meeting the requirements of those recommendations. Any final questions on this one? Okay, can we move on to item 6? Well, a warm welcome to DCI Richard Taylor from Police Scotland, who's going to speak to a paper on digital forensics. Richard?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, board members. DCI Richard Taylor, as you said, from the Cyber Capabilities Programme in Police Scotland. Essentially, we are responsible for transformational piece of work in digital forensics arena, and specifically today I draw your attention to the papers in respect of our journey towards ISO accreditation. International organisation standardisation is the recognised standardisation internationally for both SPA forensics, and I would like to say at this time, thank you for your assistance in respect to this project to date, Fiona, and also has been deemed the most appropriate accreditation from a digital forensic perspective. As a result of that, we have formalised a project through the Capabilities Programme for 3 years, due to end in 2024, in order for all of our 5 labs to attain accreditation ISO 17025. I would say and draw members' attention to the appendix that the timeline is very much indicative at this moment in time and has been ratified for a number of reasons, as I will go into in more detail. The recruitment of our quality team, the availability of appropriate training in order to obtain the accreditation, both for our staff and for our quality team as they onboard, and also, as I'm sure everybody's aware, the availability of hardware in respect of the ongoing microchip shortage brought on by COVID, unfortunately. As members will see, we're taking a staged approach to obtaining accreditation, both in the type of examination and also by location in terms of hubs throughout Scotland. We're taking this approach for a number of reasons. One, the learning which we've been able to take from SPA Forensics, and also from our colleagues elsewhere in the UK who have accreditation in the digital forensics arena for ISO. We're also looking in terms of that staged approach initially at mobile devices. Essentially, if you can separate the 2 types of examination in the broadest sense that we conduct as being mobile and non-mobile, invariably computers. We are focusing on mobile initially. It is the largest amount of resource which is dedicated from the department in terms of the work which we are required to do for examination purposes. And we are also focusing on, as I said, 1 location at a time, the initial location being in Aberdeen, with the 4 other locations falling on in line with the timeline as attached. Progress to date in terms of where we are, we have completed a gap analysis, which is essentially a snapshot which we had some professional services assist with in terms of our digital forensic setup at the current time and where we need to align ourselves in order to achieve that accreditation, and also being cognizant of forensics science regulators' recommendations in conjunction with that. In terms of those, and as I said, we started at Aberdeen. It was a brand new premises, so it very much gave us that opportunity to address the estate's requirements from an ISO perspective at the beginning, which we were able to put in place. And following on from that, and again in line with the timeline, training, hardware and recruitment, as I said, of that cybercrime quality management team has taken place to various extents. In terms specifically of the quality team, we are fortunate that we have 3 of the 4 posts filled, and we are now back out to advert in terms of 1 remaining post, which is the audit officer. The posts which has already been filled are in the process of vetting and various stages of recruitment, and we'll hopefully have those posts in place in the forthcoming weeks. In terms of next steps, we are very much at the current time in line with the attached timelines in the appendix, and we'll continue with the onboarding of the staff, which I've discussed. We're also looking to supplement my officer team with 2 further posts to provide a greater resilience, recognising what, to the extent that this is a transformational piece of work for digital forensics and the relevant support that will require. We will work through the gap analysis, and that will inevitably entail the creation of a quality manual, various SOPs and general alignment to the requirements of ISO 17025. And I think, Chair, that is obviously in conjunction with members having an opportunity to view the paper, a very quick synopsis of where we currently are.
Chair, that's really helpful. Thanks for that. And your paper is excellent too in terms of the timelines, gives us a sense of that pathway. I'll open it up for questions just now. Caroline.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Richie. This paper is excellent, actually. So, and really very clear, having it all kind of laid out in terms of the timelines. And I just wonder, because this is it's a big project, this, as you've outlined, and I'm just wondering in terms of the timescales, do you think you've kind of got enough of a buffer in there? Because I'm just thinking by the looks of your timescale, but you haven't got that much longer to go to when you're going to be going kind of live with this. So, because it's such a big project, and I was just wondering how big the gap analysis had been to where we are now, to where we've got to get to in terms of that staging. Thanks.
No problem, Chair. So Yeah, but there's 28 recommendations in the back of the gap analysis, Caroline, and 10 in respect of forensic science regulators specifically. In terms of Aberdeen and new premises at Muggy Moss, without the quality team actually being in place, my own team have been able to develop that to an extent where I have a fair degree of confidence that September is achievable for us in respect of Aberdeen. Again, I would just highlight the dependencies we've got out with in terms of identifying that audit officer, availability of chips for hardware, and also the external provision of courses. Yeah. A fair degree of confidence, I would say, Caroline. Thanks.
Well, no, that's great news, because there are so many bits of that are out with your control, really, in terms of that kind of availability of things. So that's good news to hear. Thanks, Richie. I will look forward to hearing how we're getting on with this. It's great. Thank you.
Jane Ryder, please.
Mine was just a comment. I commend that, and I'm really pleased at the degree of confidence, because if I think about it, that 2024 date was a commitment that was made in response to the digital forensics report, which was back in the very early days of COVID, in the sense of spring 2020. So if you haven't lost ground throughout COVID, I think that's doing remarkably well. And I will be really pleased to see that. I suppose, yeah, the red flag for me is the audit officer, but we'll hope that you can address that. But I do recognise the difficulties of the marketplace at the moment for personnel as well as physical chips. But yeah, that's very encouraging. Thank you.
And Richard, are you still receiving direct support from Craig Donaghy from Forensics in terms of UCAS accreditation? Because on your timeline, actually achieving accreditation is only a year away.
Yeah, Craig's been excellent, Chair. And again, I would just highlight the assistance Fiona's also given us. But Craig, on a weekly basis, is tying in with us from everything from that understanding of scope of initial accreditation to actually assistance with the recruitment of the dedicated roles in order to obtain accreditation, and more importantly, to ensure that we're re-accredited when we achieve it in the first instance.
Yeah. Just ahead, if members have completed their questions, can I remind them to put their hands down? Just on in terms of other services across the UK and accreditation, is there any benchmark here for policing services and forensic services in relation to digital?
Yes, so elsewhere in the UK, all other forces have gone for 17025, with the recognition that it potentially wasn't initially designed for a digital forensic arena. However, when we look at the international organisation standards overall, it's deemed the most appropriate within the UK, and other forces have already aligned to that, or they're in the progress in terms of their journey, similar to ourselves.
So we're in the right ballpark with the ISO that we're following. That's encouraging. Thank you. Any other questions in relation to digital at this time? Now, the big question, members, is we have an outstanding action around digital, but that action, I'll bring it right at you at the same time, Malcolm, if you don't mind, was in the enormity of cyber. I think that the actions risk will never close because it's always ongoing. So my question is, after this very encouraging update today, I wanted to wait till we heard that. Would it be reasonable to say, well, that phase of that action has been achieved, but we raise an action around our specific interests in accreditation, which is then aimed at working up towards the ISO accreditation and where it's going, and after that is really business as usual monitoring and whatever papers come forward. So Malcolm, could you give a sort of reflection of what I've said there, but then I'll offer it to members to give their comments or thoughts on that.
Thanks, Chair. And I wanted to start off with a couple of other points if I could, and I'll maybe come to the action at the end. Firstly, thanks to Richie and the team for some fantastic work. We knew that this would be challenging, that it was ambitious, Jane's right, it came out of the work that we did examining, which is something I think we need to return to at some point, because it would be clearly something that we need a lot of advanced planning, given the strategic nature of any kind of shift of responsibility. But it came in that initial look at what model might best deliver digital forensics within the current context of Police Scotland and the SPA responsibilities, and how that was settled in 2012 for the Police and Fire Reform Act. So I think Rich and his team have done a fantastic job in moving this forward. It's a really important foundation, actually. And you asked a question about the UK model, and we are a little bit further behind than some in terms of formal accreditation, but we're very much advanced in terms of the opportunities we have as a national service now we're moving through this. In other areas of the UK, there's a heavy reliance on outsourcing, which is also subject of the same accreditation, and there's a fragmented approach across what is a really challenging and growing area, as members are aware. The importance of this more widely into our ambition around about tackling cybercrime and preventing it, into public protection, both issues that members have heard about in other forums recently. And this is absolutely critical to protecting vulnerable victims, children, to ensuring that we are preventing crime, and digital forensics is going to have to grow and adapt very quickly. The accreditation is the absolute foundation to make sure that happens. And the final point I wanted to make is just recognising the points being raised, that the support in the process through Craig, but through Fiona and the entire team in Forensic Services has been really critical, because this isn't a journey that Police Scotland's got familiarity with going through, but it is something that there's a lot of lessons have been learned in Forensic Services over many, many years, and that's been a really good example of collaborative working. In relation to the action and my perspective on that, I think it is discharged in relation to this specific task, but I do think it would be worthy of us finding another forum to find the time to explore those broader issues in relation to digital forensics and where we would place that in the whole scheme of our advanced strategic planning for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the question about the future of digital forensics, I think that's a bit of work we can take off table, and I'll put that action over to yourself. Well, does it go with yourself, Malcolm? Does it go with Fiona in terms of coming back with thoughts around how we take it forward as a committee? Because the committee wouldn't hold the action itself, but I do think there's also still the item that until we have accreditation of digital forensics, we've not fully discharged our interest in it in this phase. But it's whether that action as it stands is too wide on that. Then Jane, you've been with it all the way through, so your thoughts?
Well, I think my thoughts in relation to that first or second point is I'd like some more time to think about it, in the sense that it is a much bigger issue than simply forensics, actually. And so it sits in the context of the wider policing family, as it were, and that particularly that relationship between Police Scotland, SPA oversight and forensics. So it's complicated. It was a very good process last time. And we might think and look back at that, at some of the lessons learned, but also things have moved on. So how we consider it in a new context. As regards the action specific, I don't think it's fully discharged yet, because it was to ensure that accreditation was secured. I mean, we're well on the journey. I think I would leave it open for the moment.
But we'll update the for this meeting the wording around that we're specifically relating to the accreditation, and that timeline's there, and we'll monitor that. But I do think there's a separate bit of work to be conducted, which will bring back a recommendation as to how we take forward the point that Malcolm and Fiona and Pass make. So I think that action is frankly a joint action between Fiona and Malcolm, and we'll we'll take it from there, whoever brings the paper forward. Okay, so Richie, thanks again. That was your welcome and contribution, and it's been, you've heard yourself, it's reflected in the amount of work that's ongoing. Please pass on the committee's sincere appreciation to your team who are doing this work, and to Craig Donachie and his team who's been supporting the back. Our thanks to you also. Can we move on then to item 7? Is down as a verbal update from Fiona on demonstrating the value of forensic service. This has been ongoing for some time.
Thank you, Chair. So since the last discussion that we had with committee members, we have made progress with regards to how we want to structure and prioritise work around demonstrating the value of forensic science provision. Through the more detailed business planning work in relation to the delivery of the refreshed forensic strategy, we've identified 3 key phases of looking at this particular piece of work, which is, it is a very challenging piece to fully understand and be able to quantify how forensic science contributes to keeping communities in Scotland safe. So the 3 phases really, initially, the first phase looks at how can we consider value judgments in regards to triage and prioritisation of forensic work, and that delivers some more immediate benefits in terms of making sure that the capacity within forensic science is utilised where it's going to add that most value. The second part of it considers some of those more challenging areas, which is how can we demonstrate the value of forensic science within the justice system? How can we demonstrate the value that forensic science could add actually beyond the justice system? How can we start to quantify some of that, and how can we have a model that translates forensic value into how we keep communities in Scotland safe and protected? The third phase of that then considers the contribution and the value of forensic science being delivered from a public sector perspective, and we'll build on some interesting work that's being undertaken in Northern Ireland with regards to the value of forensic science delivered in the public sector. So those 3 key phases of work is how we intend to approach this particular action. We have made progress since the last meeting in finalising the terms of reference to establish a working group, and I'd like to thank Jane Ryder in particular for your contribution in terms of getting us to that point. So the intention over the next period is to get the working group established, and then that group considering the second and third phases of looking at forensic science value, and then creating a prioritised plan of how we can start to dig into this complex area, and really start to get some contribution back to the committee members with regards to how we can define the contribution and value of forensic science within the justice sector, but also more broadly to communities in Scotland.
Thanks, Fiona. Jane, is there anything you would like to say before I open it up?
No, just, I mean, that's a good outline of thinking to date. I think, just for the avoidance of doubt, this won't be a single or simple methodology. Rather, it's a methodology, a framework which has several strands, which we've been discussing, and certainly looking at some, if not benchmarks, comparators. I think that we can draw on the work of Northern Ireland, looking at what academia, looking at some of the broader, more philosophical, sociological work that's going on. And the other thing I've said to Fiona and her colleagues, it's not something you can do overnight, but equally it's not something that's a 10-year project. We need to put some timelines in, and some realistic timelines, and some milestones along the way. But good work.
You're going to say
Good work so far, but we need to accelerate a little. And I recognise that, and that's partly because of my availability. But
so there is an action relating to this which will update going into April. The demonstrating value, and it's as much a verbal up to date, just brings where we are, and I think April will give us more detail around that. Any other questions before we move off this subject? Okay, moving on to item A. Alistair, Patience has given us a more detailed update of where we are with the drug driving scenario. Just to be clear in terms of where I see it in forensics is providing the scientific service to it. It's not given the justice policy in relation to this. It's not given them the enforcement actions, etc. So in some ways, it's the recipient of the product of the work of other agents in this issue, and therefore the capacity which was designed at the start was designed around what was available in an assessment of a service that was being stood up. So in some ways the backlogs here at the moment, and Scottish Government and partners have been very responsive to trying to assist with that, but we're responding to the reality of a situation rather than it being we're at a level and then dropping off it. We're building up to capacity here. So I think it's important to put that into context with drug driving. Alistair, can I ask you to present?
Thanks very much, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So, as members will be aware, changes to the Road Traffic Act 1988 were enacted in Scotland in October 2019. The legislative change was part of the Scottish Government's programme of government in the 1920 year. Forensic Services analysed blood samples from those who have been accused of drug driving, having tested positive for a banned drug at the roadside. And the process is accredited to the recognised laboratory standard ISO 17025 by UCAS, as Richie has alluded to earlier. As the Chair and Fiona have said, there is an imbalance between demand and capacity in this area, and the team are working very hard to try and address the demands. So it's very pleasing to hear the positive feedback from Police Scotland colleagues earlier in relation to drug spiking in particular, and I will pass on those kind comments to the team. So as a follow-up to the previous Forensic Services Committee, I can report that outsourcing of Section 5A cases has continued as planned. Additional funding was approved by the Scottish Government in November 21, which will allow about 900 cases to be outsourced, and that is ongoing at the moment. It would be remiss of me not to recognise the support that has been provided by the Scottish Government there, and I would just like to minute that. It's been very much appreciated. And I would also like to record my thanks and the thanks of Forensic Services to Police Scotland and also COPFS for the collaborative effort in relation to drug driving. The FS 2026 operating model project includes a potential increase in capacity for toxicology services. However, there's still some work to do there to determine the capacity in terms of forecasting work, which is ongoing. Further dialogue with Police Scotland and COPFS has helped scope and clarify what options could be considered for the provision of the longer-term sustainable model. And finally, the tripartite position paper, which has been co-authored by ourselves, Police Scotland and COPFS, is in the process of being submitted to the Scottish Government in this regard. And I've referred to some potential implications there in the other parts of the paper. So I think that probably concludes my summary, and I would be happy to take any questions.
Okay. We've had quite a bit of reference to drug driving throughout today's agenda and the demand that's there. Are there any other comments from members or indeed from Police Scotland or Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service? Okay. Paul Eadie, I see you've put your hand up.
Yes, it's 1.6. Can I ask, are the levels of drug driving, have they, of drug usage, etc., have they actually got worse over the last couple of years? And is that one of the reasons, or was capacity below what it would have been anyway? Did you anticipate this level when setting up the service?
So when the service was set up, Paul, and it's a really good question, when the service was set up, it was developed based on the best available information at that point. So as time has progressed, we have seen a higher level of demand there, but in relation to the setup, it is higher than was originally anticipated.
Right, significantly higher? Well, obviously, because we've got this capacity issue.
Yes, it is higher, significantly higher than was originally forecast. I think that would be fair to say.
Thanks.
Ken Donnelly from the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service.
Well, just to answer that point, so before this was enacted, we didn't have any data as to what the prevalence was in Scotland, so there's no issue about knowing whether there's been an increase or a decrease. It was just about operating in a vacuum and using the best available information. So we looked at the experience in other jurisdictions, and the projection of demand was based on that. The reality has turned out to be significantly more than that. And unfortunately, the data set we used, as I understand it, the numbers in those jurisdictions have increased, I think, because of enhanced rollout and deployment. And so the data we used was the best that was available, but it's proved to be inaccurate in terms of assessment of demand.
Yeah, thanks for that, because when I was doing my prep for this, I was conscious that my question might be a how long is a piece of string question, but there are extrapolations from elsewhere, but of course every locality is different. But yeah, thanks for that.
Thanks for that. And DCC, Graham.
Hi, thanks, Chair. I just maybe add a little bit of sort of practical policing perspective and impact on this issue and why it's important. So everything that's been said about the lack of visibility we had on the issue in terms of data is absolutely spot on. When the new legislation came in, quite deliberately, Police Scotland took a very kind of measured approach to ensure that this capability was directed in a very intelligence-led way, and it's only roads policing officers who have the training and the equipment to be able to perform these tests. Now, even with that, I think we were surprised at the proportion of positive tests out of the overall number of tests that we are doing. That is evidence of the directed nature and the intelligence-led use of this tactic. I think what we need to do is we're designing the future capacity that we need is bear in mind that that needs to match what we think the scale and nature of the problem is as best as we can estimate. And I think we can do more on that now with the sort of three odd years of experience that we have since the legislation came in a way that we couldn't when we were first setting it up. And what's fundamental here, underlying all of this, is that there are a significant number of people who are driving on the roads under the influence of drugs that previously we weren't able to detect. And those people are causing dangers to other road users, to themselves, to passengers and vehicles. And it's absolutely critical that we put as much effort as we can into getting this right for public safety and wider road and other road user safety as well.
Paul, do you want to come back?
Yeah. Can I ask, in this context, what do you mean by intelligence-led?
Well, it can mean a variety of things. It means that we have specific intelligence about individuals who are driving under the influence of drugs, and we can use this equipment and legislation through those policing officers to target either those individuals or those areas where we have intelligence that exists, or there can be areas where we think it's more likely that people will be driving under the influence of drugs. Now, the other thing is if a local policing response or community officer spots something that they think requires this test, and they can call roads policing officers in. I'm just trying to paint a picture that this isn't something that's used as routinely as, for instance, you know, a roadside breath test for drink driving, where you would do it on every occasion that somebody's committed a moving road traffic offence, or you would do it if you suspected somebody had alcohol in their body for some other reason, as the legislation lays out. So the volume is directed at instances where we actually believe it's likely that this is happening, and that's why there's such a high level of positive cases. And I think it's important that we look at opportunities of where we can expand that, and if we need to expand it because it's interests of safer roads to do that, then we need to find ways of increasing the capacity and on the forensic side to match that public safety imperative. I think that's the broader point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, that's precisely the last point was the one I was kind of driving at, if you excuse the pun. Great, thanks for that.
Thank you. In relation to this issue, the role of this committee is about ensuring best value for forensic science in Scotland and effectiveness and efficiency in delivering those services, making sure that there's integrity of how those services are delivered, etc. And we are doing all that. That's what this business is about. The policy issue in relation to tackling people who drive vehicles on the roads of Scotland while under the influence of drugs is exactly that, a policy issue, and then enforcement follows that. And that bit of it goes beyond this committee. It can express its views, it can express its frustration in terms of maintaining our responsibilities around best value and all the rest of it. Being challenged by a volume that's more than anyone predicted. You know, I use the analogy: if you've got one speed camera in a county, your level of speed in that county compared to if you have 10 speed cameras is different. But when if you design it at the stage you only have one speed camera, that's your knowledge. You know that, and this is a similar position. So there are bigger issues here around, and this committee utterly condemns people who drive in the roads of Scotland while under the influence of drugs, and will continue to work hard to provide a service to support law enforcement and prosecution of such offenders in Scotland. I think that would be the statement from the committee, but we do recognise that matching the capacity to the demand, and it's not just all about technology, it's also about expert opinion, and it's about people and scientists as well as equipment. That's an investment that undoubtedly is clear now needs to be made going forward to match it as we learn more information about what that demand is. If you allow me, I'll draw that item to close at this stage, and we will continue to monitor it and work. The report, the joint paper from police, forensics and Crown Officer Procurator Fiscal Service is due to go to submitted to the Scottish Government, if not already submitted, and we will await the outcome of that with real interest. The final item in the public session is around the committee work plan. It's a verbal update today because we're still forming it. It's really going into next year's. It's been circulated to those around the table, and can I really, on behalf of the SPA Secretariat, seek your support. It's really important that we have the responses to that, but I'd like to set a deadline the 1st of March if I can, so that we can have it ready and published for the next committee, the work plan for that year. Any emergent areas, apart from what we know are core business and that we want to look at get into next year. I don't propose going in much more than that today. It's really about what's seen as a priority from your business area. At this stage, I propose a short comfort break for 5 minutes, reconvening. If you stay on the line and put your cameras and volume off. If you are not with us for the private session, we would ask you to leave, and we will reconvene at 11:35. Thank you very much.